You can see how I lost my voice between last night and today. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this incredible opportunity to be in conversation with Congressperson Laura Friedman. I'm so grateful to you for making the time in the midst of the storm of our time to come and sit with our community. So just a brief word of background as we begin. So Congresswoman Friedman proudly represents California's 30th district, which includes Burbank, Glendale, West Hollywood, and parts of LA and Pasadena. And yes, that's good. Mm-hmm. And I know among your passions and deepest concerns are making housing more affordable, safeguarding access to clean water, protecting communities from wildfires and other natural disasters, and creating an economy that really works for everyone. And I can see that there will be a tremendous alignment between us on many of these issues. But I'll just briefly say that before joining Congress, Congresswoman Friedman represented the 44th District in the California State Assembly, where she was a tireless advocate for the environment, for housing and transportation, all of the things that are so deeply important for us in this time. I am so grateful for the opportunity to sit and schmooze and get to know you a little bit and share a little bit about us. I want to thank Brooke Wertschefter, our Director of Community Organizing, and our Minyan Tzedek leadership. If any of you are here right now, I think some are still making their way through the bagel line. But if we have any Minyan Tzedek, that's right. Thank you. Hi, Tony. Thank you for this conversation is part of our Know Your Rep series, which Minyan Tzedek leadership created 8 years ago, something like that. And we've had the wonderful opportunity to bring lots of elected officials, both local, statewide, and also congresspeople and senators here to speak with us. And it's been a wonderful way for us to really get to know our electeds, and for you to get to know us, and for us to think and talk together about what matters most in this moment. So thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you all. I know it's been a long morning already, and so we're grateful to grab hold of this precious moment. So there are many things that we would love to talk to you about today and hear your thoughts on. I'll give you the kind of headlines, which are really want to think about environmental protection and transportation issues with you, things that are very important for us as Angelenos. We want to talk about this moment, what's going on in our country, and what you and we can do to help support civil rights, voting rights, etc. As many of our institutions are coming under attack right now from the federal government, from the administration, I should say more accurately, what we can do about it. We want to talk about housing. We need to talk about immigrants and about deportations and illegal deportations without due process. And we want to talk about how to keep our trans family and community safe, and about anti-Semitism. And that's a lot to do in 45 minutes. So let's get to it, as I think John Lovett would say. Okay, so we'll start at the very top. We're very grateful for your longtime commitment to environmental protection, to increasing the supply of affordable housing, in our city and state, and to working on the transportation system here in California. I recently read Ezra Klein's new book, Abundance, which I recommend for everybody. It is kind of a devastating look at the reality of why it is so hard, especially in blue states, to get some of these projects move forward. And I think a really important critique and an important way for us to think about what might need to change in the days ahead. I'm really curious if you can begin by just telling us what made you decide to make the leap to Congress now. What you are hoping might be possible in those areas that matter so deeply to you: environment, housing, transportation, given the current makeup of our Congress. And what do you think is reasonable that we might be able, when we as a community take on projects and campaigns here, one of the pieces of our matrix of analysis is where can we win? What's winnable? And so I'm curious what made you decide to go to Congress, and what do you think is winnable given our shared concerns about those certain core areas in light of the climate that we're living in now?
Well, you said we were going to cover a lot of topics, and that was a lot of questions in one question as well. I appreciate the ambition of the topic array and of the question. Before I answer that, let me first just thank you for having me, and to thank all of you for taking the time to be in this room. I'm a member of Temple Emmanuel in Burbank, but IKAR is really a vibe, and I've been here several times, including for high holidays, and the vibe is just unmatched across Los Angeles, as well as the interest in social advocacy and justice, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you for that. So I started in local government. I started as a city commissioner in Glendale, and then as a city council member in Glendale, where I learned a lot about land use, because fundamentally local government's really about how you plan for your community to move forward, and it's very project-based in a way. You know, are you going to build a park? Are you going to build a bike lane? How are you gonna build the housing that you need? That's a lot of what local government's about. And I found that very interesting, given that some of my biggest nightmares revolve around climate change, sustainability, and what's happening to our environment. And you know, just seeing what's been happening for the last 15 years in California, I don't see how you ignore that with heat events, with mega fire, with everything that we're seeing now, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's potentially to come. So as I moved from local government into the state legislature, I was able to take that experience and interest in local government and then spread that into policies that actually help all of our local decision makers be able to plan in a way that addresses climate and addresses equity. And so I've done a lot of work around housing policy and around environmental policy and ways of bringing those together. Because I think one of our issues is that we do silo a lot of our policies and discussions and a lot of our thoughts. Like, you're over here thinking about environment, maybe you're over here thinking about housing, and you're over here thinking about transportation. Mm-hmm. And as I worked in these issues, I saw that these are actually all the same issue, and that you have to work together on a lot of these issues to really tackle sustainability. And in LA, for instance, you can't build housing without dealing with transportation, because the first time you try to put anything in, what everyone says is, I don't want to have that project around me because of all of the impacts to traffic, congestion, and parking. So how do you fix one without the other? So I started to care about issues that seem to bring all those together. That's why I worked on parking, for instance, on parking reform. So how do you deal with land use and housing and environment all together and bring those stakeholders together? See, if you ask me questions like this, I can go on for a long time talking about politics. That's what you're here for. I really love all of this stuff. And so I worked a lot on these issues and was able to chair the Transportation Committee in the Assembly and chair Natural Resources, at different times, and work to bring these groups together. And I think that the abundance movement is actually, in some ways, the recognition that we have to have political wording around these policies to make people understand the importance of them, that it's not just about parking or it's not just about housing. It's really about people understanding what these issues mean to their life. And abundance is sort of Ezra Klein's way of saying, like, so many of our problems around affordability that brought us Donald Trump, we can actually deal with by getting serious around taking on things that seem intractable, that are real barriers to people being able to afford rent or buy a house, that moves elections and moves electorates. So the more I worked in these issues, the more I also was paying attention to what was happening at the national level, because, we were having Obama, but we had come out of Trump. And, I have an 11-year-old girl who wouldn't be able to have an abortion in the state that I grew up in Florida, which is very fundamental to me, given that my mother spent her whole life working for abortion rights. So a lot of the fights that I care about, California is going in the good direction with a lot of these issues. But the federal government, not so much. And, we are seeing, and, I have no idea what your politics are, but in my mind, I kind of do.
I don't think you meant that as a laugh line.
I think that, I would say that many of us, particularly maybe some of the older activists, felt like you win these battles and you keep building on them. You get abortion right, you get civil rights, then you get abortion rights. Going back even further, women get the right to vote, then you get abortion rights, then you get LGBT rights. Then you just keep building on that. But what we've realized is it's not such an upward trajectory necessarily. And that you have to constantly work not just to get more equity and more freedom, but to defend the gains you've already made.
Yes.
And so as I saw under the first Trump administration us backslide and then kind of regain ground, I decided to run because, this threat from the far right is just getting worse and worse. And it's also caused a kind of division in our community that's transcended into people actually believing that different events happened, from each other. An election was stolen, an election wasn't stolen. Immigrants are taking my jobs, immigrants aren't taking my jobs. So I felt like I have learned a lot in the legislature in the last 8 years and have been very effective in the legislature, and wanted to take that effectiveness to the federal government, given that there was an opportunity. And so I did run in this race and I won. And now that I'm there, I will tell you that it's much worse from the inside than it looks from the outside.
That's very comforting. Thank you.
I don't remember what you asked me.
That was exactly right.
Maybe I answered it. It wasn't that. But ask it again then.
I mean, I believe you that it's worse than we even know. I believe you. I think this is, I think it's moved more quickly and in more extreme ways than people even imagined. And so given all of that, given the reality of what we're seeing, I wonder what you think can be done. I know that most of the most egregious acts so far have been done through executive order. And Congress has been, at least from the outsider vantage point, strangely sidelined in this in the process in the first 100 days. So, what can Congress do to place some obstacles in the path of this, this train wreck that's happening in our country right now?
Yeah, it is really a train wreck, and that's absolutely right. That we have to take the House back in a year and a half. Otherwise. A lot of this stuff can become permanent. So that's one piece, and I'll talk about that. But there's another piece which has to do with the courts. That's also tremendously important because the founding fathers were coming off of a king. They established this country to prevent Donald Trump, and they wrote the Constitution to prevent Donald Trump. And so now we have, Donald Trump and his group being very clever in a lot of ways and constantly pushing the envelope and nibbling around the edges and seeing how far over the line they can actually go and targeting the examples that they use, targeting things that they think the public will support. Not just targeting any immigrants, but trying to make the case that they're only targeting gang members and criminals. And so really trying to work in the court of public opinion at the same time that they work in the court system. So what the Democrats are doing is working very much in tandem with the AGs, the Democratic AGs across the country, and with other groups that are working on holding the administration accountable and also making sure that the worst of what they're doing, that is illegal, is stopped by the court system. So there is a litigation working group in Congress that meets, like every other week, but there's constant updates with Jamie Raskin and Joe Neguse, and there's a whole bunch of people who are very involved in that. I'm a member of that, and I'd say there's like 60 members of Congress who go to those meetings. So it's not a small thing. And we have the AGs come in and present what they're doing, and the Democratic AGs are working together in concert. Now, sometimes they have standing, and sometimes there's other groups that have standing. And so there are other groups who work, with groups of attorneys on bringing these cases forward. And we're not going to win all of them, let's be clear. But if you look at the body of cases that are out there, our side is winning the vast majority of them. And when we're not, often it's on things like standing, right, rather than on the merits. So the courts so far have been holding. We just have to pray that as they move up towards the Supreme Court, that we continue to win, and that we at least have enough judges to uphold the basis of the Constitution. And so those cases are sort of moving through the court system. And it's interesting because despite what the Trump administration says, the judges that are ruling in this have been, by the most part, conservative judges, many of whom Trump appointed or Bush appointed. So it's not like there's these crazy lefties. But so their strategy now is to discredit and dox the judges. And so that's now the course that they're on, is Elon Musk and the White House and others saying that these are crazy lefty radical judges and how dare they go against, the great leader. And that's what we're seeing play out. So it's win the House back in a year. So I'll tell you, if the election was held tomorrow for the House of Representatives, the data is showing that as far as we know, we will win and pick up, we only need 3 seats, that we have enough sort of will at this point to win those. The problem is, the bad news is the election is not tomorrow. The election is next November. So we have got to keep the momentum going and continue to push back. It's very difficult in an environment where MAGA controls social media and where Donald Trump has set up a situation where he has made social media platforms and individuals and the news media afraid to contradict him, where he's basically fired people at the Justice Department and hired loyalists who will bring cases, actual legal cases, against anyone who stands up to him. And he went after law firms who were defending some of these folks in court, as you all know. So it's a very scary and dangerous and serious situation. I will say that their lawlessness and aggressiveness, however, in many cases has been also matched by incompetence, which we are lucky about. And so they can't seem to help themselves. A lot of these loyalists that they've appointed are also bumbling fools in a lot of ways who constantly kind of get themselves in trouble in the media. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take them very seriously, because at this point, there are still far too many Americans who are buying what they are selling. And so that is still, that's still the case.
A major concern that I have heard many people share is that we're very aware of what's broken on one side of the aisle, and the Democratic Party seems to not have its act together at all. And in fact, if you read Frank Bruni this morning, he had this argument that there's a kind of rift in the party between the like Alyssa Slotkin is criticizing the AOC Bernie Sanders side of the party, and is it about fighting wokeness, or is it about being who we are and standing for our values no matter what? And I do have a concern that part of our responsibility, and this really is a very deeply Jewish idea, when something bad happens, is to really look at ourselves and say, okay, what went wrong here? What could we do differently? What's my responsibility here? And what's a better path forward? And we don't see a lot in the public discourse of where that's happening. And so I hear you saying that if the elections were right now, that Democrats would actually pick up those 3 seats, but I don't see a coherent strategy or even voice expressing what the core values are, other than opposition to a very bad thing that's happening. And so I wonder if you're seeing something different from the inside.
Yeah, I'd say a few things. First of all, I think that there is a feature and not a bug in the Democratic Party, which is that we are a big tent party. And one thing that I've learned that's become very clear to me going from the state of California to the federal government is how many flavors of Democrats you have from across the country. So you have Democrats from Los Angeles, me, and others who have, one vision of what we'd like to see the party take on. And then you've got Democrats from rural areas and Democrats from Rust Belt areas who have maybe a different idea of what they want to see the party focus on. And it's going to be different in different places. And I think what I would like to say is I think that's okay. I think that we can have room for differences of opinion from within the party. And some of this, I think we should embrace that we are not a party where everyone has to always be in lockstep. And it's okay for us to have these discussions. But I would also say that it's absolutely true that we're not going to win if we're constantly just talking about Donald Trump. We have been talking about how awful Donald Trump is since 2016, right? When he got elected in 2016, we talked about how awful he was, and he was a terrible president. And then he lost, and we had a different president, and we kept talking about how awful he was, and then he won. So we shouldn't be repeating the same pattern. I think what we should be doing is two things. And there's probably more things we should be doing, but I'll highlight a couple. First of all, we do need to talk about the actual impacts that his policies are having on people. And they are having real impacts now, and they're going to continue to have real impacts. You know, senior citizens understand what's at stake when they fire massive amounts of people who give services to Social Security and talk about privatizing Social Security and sending call centers out of the state. Seniors know what's at stake when they close Social Security offices to where seniors can't go anymore and then say that they're not going to let you sign up for stuff through the phone anymore, or that you have to go on the internet. Veterans understand what's at stake when they fire people from the VA who give services to veterans who are themselves veterans. And all of a sudden, there's no more hotlines for PTSD treatment, and people who were getting treatment for burn pits can't get that anymore because they X that out. Cancer patients know what's at stake when they cancel cancer trials midstream and people can't go get their treatment anymore because their trial's been canceled. Our hospitals know what's at stake when they're no longer getting money that they were getting from the federal government to treat low-income patients. And that's actually happening right now all across Los Angeles. Small business owners know how it's affecting them when they can't bring their products in from China where they had it manufactured because of tariffs. Now, big companies, they can absorb that, but a very small business can't. And I am hearing over and over again in my office from small businesses who say, can you help us get our goods in? We've already paid for them, but I can't afford the tariff. So I'm just going to have to leave all this stuff there and go bankrupt. We are hearing this over and over again from our smallest businesses. So elevating what's actually at stake, how people are getting hurt by the reckless actions of this administration, that's number one. And number two, rather than yelling about Trump all the time, I actually believe, and by the way, I know a lot of you are doing this already, but that Democrats should be out every day at the schools, at the veteran centers, at the hospitals, picking up the slack and helping our neighbors and doing it as a Democrat. Like out there wearing a shirt that says Democrat while you're planting trees on a school property, wearing a shirt that says Democrat when you're at the VA helping the veterans because there's not enough people working at the VA anymore. That we go out and actually help people so that next time around they say, you know who helped me in my time of need? It was a bunch of Democrats who came out and helped me. Rather than standing on a street corner, as good as that is, because it makes us all feel good yelling about Donald Trump, there are people out there who are independent voters who voted for Donald Trump because something under Obama was not working for them. We have to figure out what they were missing in that and go and try to fill that need. There were a lot of people who were upset that even despite voting for Obama, they couldn't afford that they felt they couldn't afford a house anymore. Their rent was too high, their wages are stagnant, and they were willing to try something different. Now, as much as that Trump's policies aren't making things cheaper for them, aren't helping them buy a house anymore, we need to be out there showing that that we care about them, and we're willing to be there to help them.
I had lunch this week with a friend, Dr. Patricia Gordon, who has dedicated her life to developing a proactive treatment for cervical cancer, which has actually been able to prevent cervical cancer in hundreds of thousands of people across the developing world. She was particularly focused on the healthcare systems in Kenya, and she was sharing with me what the impact is of the cuts to USAID. And she said that 25% of the country is HIV positive, but because of the antiretrovirals that were coming through that office, that HIV positive status did not turn into full-blown AIDS for the population. And now with those cuts, people literally don't have access to their medication anymore. And she said with the greatest urgency, like, do Americans not think that that's going to come to our shore when we see a full-blown AIDS epidemic once again in our time? Do we think that it's not going to be just a few months later that happens here as well? And I hear what you're saying about, we say this a lot as Jews, like put on your kippah, put on your, Magen David necklace and go do good in the world. And that's the best way to sort of respond to anti-Semitism. But I also see that these problems are, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. We're talking about billions of people, literally, who are impacted by what's happening. And, I think if we get 25 people every, once a week to go volunteer, it's not going to be, so I wonder what you're in a position of power. You're literally in the halls of power, even as really an opposition party in this government. So there has to be more that we can do. Literally to save people's lives right now. So what are you and other members of Congress able to do? We will deal with the kind of communal activism side and the showing up and the hands-on volunteerism, but what are members of Congress able to do, and what kind of support do you need from us in order to strengthen your hand to help push back on some of these really draconian measures that we've seen?
Yeah, it's, we're still trying to figure out what we're able to do, because in a trifecta government like the Republicans have right now, no bill comes to the floor unless they want to bring it to the floor. So we can bring up whatever bills we want, but they will not see the light of day. They won't even be debated. They won't even be discussed. We can put in whatever amendments we want in committee. I just had amendments for the victims of natural disaster, including the hurricanes on the East Coast in Republican states, that said that everybody should get the full amount that FEMA is supposed to be giving them. Every Republican voted against it. So it doesn't even matter what the amendment is. They are not voting for any Democratic amendment, no matter how good and righteous it seems to the American people. So as long as they're taking this position, all we can do is to, like you said, to be that opposition party and say there's a better way. Here's amendments. Here are bills that would actually help people right now in their time of need, and they will still not bring any of those up. But it's shining a light on that, and helping us shine a light on the fact that we are there with solutions, that we are, that there are bills that are out there that Democrats have put forward that do go to the heart of a lot of these problems that we have as a country, and they are not being given even a debate, much less a vote. And meanwhile, what are they doing? When we know that people are suffering from natural disasters, when we know that there's hunger in this country, when we know there's anxiety, well, I'll tell you, this week they're doing something about something called the Copernicus Institute, which I don't know anything about. That's one of the two bills they're bringing to the floor this week. The second bill is they're renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. That is what they are spending our time doing. Last week, they have waged a war on commercial appliances. I kid you not. They have passed a series of bills to roll back energy efficiency for very large walk-in refrigerators, which, by the way, no one's asking for them to do this. If you're a restaurant, do you want to buy a refrigerator that uses more electricity given the cost of electricity, or do you want to buy a refrigerator that uses less electricity? I would say the latter, but this was a rule that was adopted several years ago that was about to go into effect. All the companies were ready with the refrigerators. No, they thought that was the most important thing, to roll back those regulations. The other thing they did was to roll back the waiver that California has had since the 1970s for fuel standards so that we don't have smog. They decided it was really important to get rid of that so that now they can sell cars in California that don't require smog tests and that, belch out smoke. They thought that was really important doing because it was more important to them to spend time hurting California, again, when no one was really asking for this, than it was to actually deal with the problems that Americans are facing right now. So I think shining a light on that there are Democratic bills out there that deal with housing, that deal with hunger, that deal with the environment, that deal with FEMA, problems with FEMA. Several of those are mine. They will not give them even a hearing.
So I'll ask a couple more questions and then we'll open it up for to hear from the community. I want to just speak to two particular things. One is about these unlawful deportations and lack of due process. Obviously the Salvadoran prison being used as like the extended arm of the U.S. retribution machinery. Yeah. There's also like these tiny children, including a cancer patient who were U.S. citizens who were deported to Honduras. What are members of Congress doing about it, and what can we do as Californians to keep our neighbors and ourselves safe?
Right. So you did see some House members go to El Salvador and talk to the prisoners there, really to elevate what's happening and to let people know that they're not being forgotten. Trump and his administration are talking about deporting U.S. citizens. They have deported green card holders. It's really, again, pushing that needle and that envelope to see how far they can take it and picking those that they think will be the least popular for the public, which is why they're so intent on trying to prove in the court of public opinion that these people were gang members. And the truth is, whether or not they were gang members, they had no due process. The same way that if you arrest someone for murder, they may have done something terrible, but they still get a trial, right? Before you decide. You don't try them in Twitter. You actually have a trial. When we deported Nazis during World War II, they got 30 days to defend themselves. These people got nothing. They were picked up and deported. So not letting them muddy the water around these issues and being very clear about what we actually care about, which is being a nation of laws and not a nation where one administration or another gets to just pick people up off the street and send them to a foreign prison to never, ever see the light of day again. We need to, and by the way, Trump ran on immigration, and it was popular with the American public. It's a lot of the American public that's very uncomfortable with immigrants, and certainly with undocumented immigrants. But even now, a lot of those same people are saying they are not comfortable with this, that they see that this is not what they thought they were getting. So that shining of the light is very, very important. And if you haven't read it yet, the New York Times this week, I don't know if any of you saw the op-ed about Donald Trump. It was very long, very unusually long in the New York Times. Brilliant. I highly recommend it because they talk about what he ran on and what was popular so that we understand that some of this stuff's very popular with a lot of the American public. But then where he is breaking the law and how, and their argument was it's really important that we not fight all these battles. You may not turn people's hearts and minds who really are just illegal immigration. Like they're just like, they don't, they're always going to be against it. You don't fight that battle. You fight the battle that it's not about that. It's about laws, the Constitution, and not having a dictator and just going through that rationale. And I would suggest if you're out there having these arguments in your communities that you take a look at this article because it does put things in a perspective that I think is helpful as you have these discussions with the most important people right now, which are independent or swing voters. If we're just talking purely political now, I feel like we've moved into this extremely political discussion. So, having that political discussion, it's important to remember who we're focusing on. There are those of us who we can all talk to each other and we're going to walk out of here. I don't know if there's anyone in this room who's like kind of undecided about Trump, but let's say we're not. So what are we, we don't need to convince each other of this. We need to reach out to people who weren't with us last time and to explain to them, maybe in ways that resonate with them, like, hey, we may not agree on immigration, but maybe we can agree that we're a nation of laws and that it's dangerous to have a king because right now maybe you like what he's doing, but you may not, and then you're powerless if you've dismantled the systems of checks and balances in this country.
So thank you for that. I want to ask you about what's going on with the universities, and I have my oldest is on one of the universities that's been kind of the epicenter of a lot of this chaos of the last year and a half, and I was really pained as a parent and as a rabbi. And as a Jew and an American by what seemed like a total failure of the universities to create safe environments for all the students on the campus, including Jewish students who were, at least in my kid's case, were routinely harassed and threatened on campus. And yet I was really horrified when I saw members of the Republican caucus take up the mantle of the Jews and fighting anti-Semitism. That was happening already in the previous administration, but now explicitly using the need to protect Jews as the reason for defunding our institutions of higher learning in ways that feel totally disingenuous, punitive, and very dangerous from my vantage point to Jews and to all of us, to democracy. And I wonder, you're in a particular position as a Jew who's in Congress. Presumably there's a Jewish caucus that you're involved in, and I wonder if Jewish members of caucus, if members of the Jewish caucus in Congress have had conversations, a kind of not in our name conversation with colleagues about how incredibly dangerous it is to be using the excuse of the protection of our community as a justification for really damaging these institutions that are at the heart of American society.
Yeah, so when I was in the legislature, I was a very active member in the California Legislative Jewish Caucus, and we had done in the last couple of years a lot of work around campus climate. And some of you know, some of you have been involved with some of that with us. I successfully did a bill myself around DEI and making sure that DEI programs on college campuses include Jewish voices, because they actually don't. And what we were finding as all of this chaos was happening on the colleges, that students were going to their universities and to the DEI departments and saying, hey, I feel like I don't feel safe and there's anti-Semitism happening here. And the college was just like, well, we don't see it. And they didn't see it because there was no one there who actually was trained in anti-Semitism, and they just didn't understand what it was. So we did this bill that said they had to include training on anti-Semitism, and they had to make sure that their teachers understood it so that they understood what it was about, what it meant, where it came from, what the tropes are, all of that, so they could recognize it, so that students and professors felt that they had a place to go. So I totally agree with what you said. We've had a real problem with anti-Semitism on our college campuses, and it's been growing. And that is undeniable in my estimation. And there are people who would argue with us about it. I mean, I've had this conversation with some of my colleagues who disagree with me. Disagree with me in Congress, some disagree in the legislature. They just don't see it, which is why it's really important that we do this education. And I totally agree with you that what the Trump administration is doing is a very cynical attempt to weaponize anti-Semitism and to use Jews and Israel for their ends, which are anything but within keeping with Jewish values. And, it's interesting to me that they defunded Columbia under this auspice, but haven't refunded them after they've done all this stuff. Like, Columbia's like, all right, here's like 10 things we're going to do. And then I'm sure Columbia was like, all right, do we get our money now? And they're like, no. Right. Because it's not about that. We just know they hate institutions of higher learning, and they've been really clear over the years that they hate the universities. And, unless it's like a Christian fundamentalist university, but they hate public education, they hate universities, and they blanket cut all university funding. I think it's by 15% across the country. And then with these elite universities, they're talking about defunding them all completely. And they're using the Jewish community as an excuse. And I think that as Jews, we have to be really clear that they cannot do this in our name. This is not in keeping with our values. It does not make Jews safer. In fact, it makes a much more unsafe environment for Jews for students on campus to think that scholarships aren't going to be given, that research is being canceled because it's what the Jews want, right? I mean, it's just not in keeping with our values. And by the way, it's also not going to work. Like, there's no nexus between this defunding and anything that's going to make Jews safer. Like, show me what you're getting out of this. Like, you're not getting anything. There's not even like a standard set of policies that they're asking these universities for. It's just an excuse, like everything else that they're doing. So there is now a Jewish caucus. There wasn't when I came in, but like a month ago, we actually formed a Jewish caucus for the first time. And I was very happy to have been a part of that conversation and sitting down with some of the Jewish members and saying, we need to have a caucus. And let me tell you what we've done in California. And there's been a lot of worry about it, honestly, because I think people are afraid of getting involved in the Israel-Gaza conversation. But there's so much that we have to worry about right here at home that's beyond that, especially rising anti-Semitism and, Holocaust denialism and what we're seeing on the far right, which is really entrenched anti-Semitism that goes along with the white nationalism that we're seeing, in the far right that's kind of creeping all around Europe. That's very dangerous for Jews. So we need to be in a place where we can have those discussions in an organized way. So there is a letter about the defunding from Brad Schneider, who's one of the co-chairs, and Jerry Nadler, who's the other co-chair, that I think all the Jewish caucus members and others are signing on to, saying that this should not be done in our name.
Great.
Letters is really all we can do. There's a lot of letters. So I found out that I have signed onto more member letters than I have been in the days than I've been in Congress. Wow. Like, I asked my staff, and actually I've been in Congress like 100 days, and I think we've signed on to like 140 letters. No joke.
Wow.
It's a lot of letters.
Wow.
One
Well-
for, a lot for each, right, one for each executive order.
I mean, please share with them when you go back to your caucus that they may hear the voice of the leadership of the established Jewish community saying, yes, we need this. We need finally, thank God, the federal government is fighting for us. But there are many, many Jews out there who see this as a cynical maneuver to weaponize and exploit Jewish suffering. And I want them to know that that's where we stand. And I'll tell you, my daughter, who has had a very rough year and a half, as soon as the first threats of defunding and detention and deportation of the student protesters came down, she said, it's like they made a focus group and they asked people, how can we make everyone hate the Jews at once? Right. And this is what they came up with, because this will not help keep Jewish students safer. I think at least in this community, I think there's some consensus around that. So I would be grateful if you could share that with your colleagues, that
absolutely.
There's a way to fight anti-Semitism and to speak out on behalf of the Jewish community. This is not it.
This is not it. And the Jews are pretty unified about that. And I'll say, you know how you really know it's cynical? The same time they did that, they defunded like the anti-hate programs that they had established on the college campuses that they had federal money in. They also disbanded like they took the anti-Semitism task force and basically threw all the Jews off it, and like Trump put in like his loyalists. Right. So that's how you know they're not serious.
Well,
but
also
what would really help is
like that's a good.
Yeah, well, there's that. But if you really are serious, give the universities money that's dedicated towards educating about anti-Semitism. Yes, that's how you actually can make Jewish students safer. Give money to educate college professors and ethnic studies professors about Jewish history and about what anti-Semitism is. That's something that would actually be hateful, but they defunded the universities, which, has the opposite effect.
There's so many more questions I have for you, and I know we only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to just ask if in the context of, I imagine some of my questions might emerge here, but I really am very concerned about it. I know we are all in this room about how to keep our trans and our LGBTQ family safe in this time. I think that there's some people feel like there's a kind of intellectual threat that comes from this administration, and some people feel like this is really a threat to my very being and to my family. And so what can we do to help really keep our families safe in this time? I would love if you could address that. But I'll leave that to come, because I imagine some other folks might have wanted to ask something similar. And maybe, would you like to hear a couple questions at once and then weave an answer, or do you want to go one at a time?
It's up to you guys.
Okay.
The number of people who have questions. Let's take like 3 questions quickly, and make them succinct, folks, and then we'll try to get some answers.
And please introduce yourself so that the Congresswoman knows who you are. This is Matan.
Matan Koch. I don't know how to introduce myself. I guess the most relevant is ADA compliance officer for the city of Los Angeles. But it's interesting that LA County supports basically every person with HIV and HIV prevention, but they're entirely funded by HHS. Now, every organization, either non-profit, or government in LA County has had the HHS go radio silent on whether they are funded beyond June 30th. They literally cannot get an answer from Washington, and they're prepared to have to close their doors July 1st. We're not going to have an HIV explosion in Kenya. We're going to have one in Los Angeles, because literally the prevention programs are about to be shuttered. What can Congress or even the citizenry do to make sure that the executive branch actually continues to function, at least for the time being?
Thank you, Matan.
Okay,
Thank you.
We're going to take a couple more.
Okay.
So
Rabbi Len.
I'm trying to get.
Hunger in the community where I serve as a rabbi when I'm not at IKAR in La Mirada. I don't know how we're going to feed the people with the massive amounts of monies that the president has cut from food banks. So all of what we're talking about is important, but literally people will be
hungry.
Whatever the word, starving, very hungry. So that's.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you about what you said about what we can do. I know that in the disability community that I'm part of, because I have a profoundly autistic son, Medicaid cuts are the biggest concern. And what the organizations that I'm part of have been doing is having their demonstrations in places like Bakersfield and Chico and going to those communities and because those are the legislators who we can influence.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what you think in terms of what we can do as a community that's not standing on the street corner in Pico Robertson. Is that the effective way to go?
Yeah, let me just say absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up because I meant to say that and I completely forgot. There are Congress members that are within driving distance who, Ken Calvert, David Valadeo, Young Kim are three who are close by and, who need to understand where people are on the cuts that that their party is going to demand they make. And we're already seeing these real cracks. We were supposed to have a vote this week on a lot of these cuts, and they're not having it this week. That's why we're only doing Gulf of Mexico, because people like you are going into these districts, and these Congress members are coming back and saying, are you kidding? 40% of my population is on Medicaid. You want me to make profound cuts to the health care for my constituents? And so they're basically behind the scenes saying, I can't do this, at least in an obvious way. They're doing a lot of cuts that people aren't seeing, that like you were talking about, where they're cutting, the money that's going back door to the hospitals, it's going to a lot of health care. But in terms of what's going directly to the Medicaid patients, they're getting cold feet. And it's that kind of action that's doing that. So thank you, and keep it up. I was going to say that is effective. You want to go protest someone, go into those districts, and register voters there and make sure that they understand that the voters there understand what's at stake. Look, there's a reason Republicans aren't doing town halls.
Right.
They may say, oh, it's because people are shipping, George Soros is paying to ship people in. They know that's not true. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene just tased people at her event. I don't know if you saw that. She literally had people tased. Those were her own people. Those were voters. They had carded people to see if they were people who live within the district before they went into these town halls. And so they know, and so they are not doing town halls. Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of action we have to keep the pressure on them, because what they're doing is bad enough, but these huge cuts are going to be awful. And what you were talking about, they are dismantling the government. And what does the government do? The government provides services, right? The government puts fires out in the forests. The government lands airplanes. The government does treatment for people here who have a whole range of needs. The government feeds people through SNAP and through other programs. They are cutting all of it. They're cutting it, freezing it, and they're kind of seeing, okay, what people are going to yell at, what's going to get my people yelling at me the most? And then we'll start dripping and drabbing a little bit back out. Mm-hmm. And then, if it's hurting the Republicans in certain districts, they'll start bringing some of it back. They're firing all the federal employees. They want to privatize. They've already said, Postal Service and others, just get rid of all the federal employees, privatize it all so that there's profit margin in it. So this isn't about efficiency. We can always make things more efficient. You know how you know it's not about efficiency? They fired all the inspector generals whose job it was to actually find inefficiencies. And those inspector generals did find inefficiencies every year, billions of dollars. They would change programs every single year to save money. Mm-hmm. They fired all those people. DOT, Department of Transportation, something I care a lot about. We're trying to expand public transportation here in Los Angeles. DOT is a big part of that. They fired every single DOT person in the state, the ones that they didn't just take their voluntary buyouts. Then, because of court order, they brought them all back, but they didn't give them their computers and they didn't give them a place to work. They didn't give them desks. They said, you have to come into a room and just sit there until we can get the courts to let us fire all of you. Seriously, we speak to these people. So this is what's going on at every level of government. And it's really awful. I think I got two of the questions. I think I got all three. Hunger, same thing. Same thing. They are cutting all these programs. And if there is no federal funding for them, then it's going to have to be up to the local governments, which right now you see where City of LA is in terms of their budget, right? We're a $1 billion deficit, and they're having to lay people off. So our local governments are also getting a big haircut from the federal government. And so it's really, really bad. And that's why when somebody said, well, how do we know that people are going to be unhappy for the next election? I don't see this turning around. And look, I don't want the Trump administration to fail. I don't want people to starve so that we win an election. I'm much more worried about people not being able to eat. And I am tremendously worried. Remember in the beginning, I said it's worse from the inside than from the outside? This is why it's worse, because I have to watch these cuts happen day after day, and I know what they're going to mean. And people don't know where they're coming from. They just know when they call, no one's going to answer the phone. And, you know, we get calls from all of our hospitals. We have no funding. You know, like, we can give the chemotherapy for another couple months, but we can't start the next round for everybody else because that was an NIH program. And those are wealthy hospitals that have money. So it's really, really scary. And by the way, this is not because there's some huge fiscal deficit that they're worried about. Let's be clear. Their budget blows up the deficit because they are giving huge tax breaks for billionaires and large corporations. It's a huge redistribution of wealth. All this money that went down to the people that we know Elon Musk called the parasite class, they're not interested in that. They want to give these big companies, and they want to, you know, this is how an oligarchy is created. I don't want to be like all blueing on y'all. But if you read about the rise of Vladimir Putin, there are steps that Putin took to create an oligarchy that we are seeing repeated in this administration right
Victor
now.
Orban
And
cut
Viktor Orban.
40% of the funding to the universities in Hungary.
Yeah.
This is a playbook.
This is a playbook.
Our hour is late, but I see that I think
We can do a few more. I don't want to just walk out.
Let's
Yeah.
do one or two more, and then we'll close. Okay.
And by the way, I'll come back again. It's not, I mean, I represent you. So this is not like I'm not going to come back.
And please introduce yourselves, and we'll do very quick questions because we want to wrap it within the next 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Heather Gold. 2 questions. One is, how do you find the Democrats prepared, if at all, to fight this as an information war, which we're obviously very deep in, and other countries get that very clearly, because that message, as far as I can see, is not very far out there in the United States. And secondly, practically speaking, even if we win all the court decisions, how can the data that Musk, I spent a lot of time in the early Silicon Valley, has already taken back? Because to me, this does not look like an oligarchy. It looks like a transfer of power that's already happening.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. The data that they're accessing through Social Security, through DOGE taking over Social Security, is really profound because it's so easy to monetize that, especially through AIs and through, you know, these large corporations who can now look at a lot of information and then price products to you according to your income. You know, even things that we know they're already doing, like if you have a death, you report a death in your family on social media, and now you want to fly to the funeral. You know, AIs can pick that up and jack up the plane fare for you because they know, you know, this is things that is very possible through AI and through information gathering, which is why we all need to be really careful about what information you're putting out into the universe, because there's no laws to prevent them from doing exactly this kind of thing. So yes, we're very worried, and there are court cases around the data. But right now, here's the thing that's so maddening. You think that as Congress, we know what data they're taking from you? They will not provide that to Congress, and the Republicans who are in power are not asking for them to do it. So how are we doing the information? We are doing town halls. I've done 3 town halls already, one in Young Kim's district in an Orange County, in an Orange district, one here in Hollywood, one in the Valley, actually 4, one in the Valley at another big temple where we had 600 people at that town hall. And I did one online, open to anybody, with Rob Bonta, our AG, to outline the legal strategy and what we're doing to sue and hold the administration accountable and deal with a lot of this. So we are going directly to people. And by the way, people are, since COVID especially, are very isolated. You know, people are on social media because they got very isolated during COVID and they feel isolated. So they're finding their group, right? They're finding their peer group, their friend group, as my 11-year-old would call it, through social media. And the way we get these people back who have fallen into these rabbit holes is through this.
Yeah.
Through real, in-person, live, face-to-face community. That is the way. These town halls are important, but the town halls you do, the synagogues, getting groups together. You know, I don't care whether it's a gardening group, kitchen group. Another thing you can do just as individuals is just reach out to people and make them less isolated, you know, bring them in and have just real conversations face to face with people is the best way to counter the power of social media. And I do think people are starting to lose faith in social media to some extent. I think people are hopefully, maybe I'm Pollyanna, that people are starting to realize that the information, like I've had friends who were I have a good friend who is totally into the whole QAnon. He's a Democrat, but he's a Donald Trump voter, who really bought all the stuff that all the crimes are being committed by illegal aliens. Like, he buys it hook, line, and sinker. But recently he's saying, I don't know what to believe anymore. He's like, I see this stuff and I don't know what's real and what's not real. You know, defunding public radio and stuff, like, there's a strategy here. They don't want people getting like sort of unbiased, you know, real media. But Democrats are talking to the influencers. They're going on the Joe Rogan show, you know, like, whatever. You know, they're, you know, really, we are trying every way we can to communicate, but mostly what you're seeing Democrats doing is like a gazillion town halls and just going all over the state and just talking to everybody.
I'm gonna close us with this, which is our most wonderful former Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, on his way out at the end of the Biden administration, wrote a paper that essentially captured what the deepest learnings were for him in his serving 2 terms as Surgeon General. And he said that the #1 response to the multiple intersecting crises of our time is community. And it's exactly what you're saying. And I was with the 7th graders the other day, and they were asking questions about how we hold this complicated moment as Jews in America with Israel and this terrible war in Gaza. And they feel like they're on a battlefield in social media. And I said the best thing that you can do is go off social media and just put your phones away and actually talk to other people. And so I'm really grateful to you for coming and taking the time to meet with us. I'm really grateful to this beautiful community for continuing to show up for and with one another again and again. Thank you to Luke, your deputy director. Thank you to Congresswoman Laura Friedman.
Can I say one last thing? Because you did ask, though, about the trans community, and this is really important, so I want to mention it. This is the community that is bearing the brunt of the worst abuse and the worst vitriol and the worst hatred and the worst demonization. And it's really, really important that we hold this community and that we support them and that we make sure that we demand safety for them, that we push back anytime we see or experience that discrimination and demonization, that we affirm that they deserve health care, that they deserve dignity, that they are community members, that they are loved and wanted here, and that we, you know, say that we are not going to support cuts to, you know, to healthcare delivery for anyone. Right. Including our trans community.
And next week is actually Trans Allyship Shabbat here at IKAR. And so we're going to be having a lunch and learn much like this one, but to really talk specifically about what we can do to help support our trans family. Congresswoman Laura Friedman, I really bless you with strength, continued moral clarity. Please know that there's a community of people here who are here to support you. We're very deeply, deeply grateful to you for all that you're doing.
Thanks for all the work you guys do. You know, this is one of the strongest communities in Los Angeles. It's one of the biggest, it's one of the strongest, and I just appreciate your focus on spirituality and spirituality with a justice focus, because another thing that Democrats should do is we should claim spirituality and religion, right? And that we can't cede that to others. And maybe that's also a way we can reach across the aisle to people, you know, as people of faith, you know, in community. I think it's a good place to start. So thank you so much for having me.